Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Insurgent Mexico. In the last episode, we were seeing everybody retreating from the surprise retaliation of the Federalists. So, yeah, they were all running and seeking shelter. But let's go ahead and jump right into this. Chapter 10, Between Attacks. About a mile back, the flight was stopped. I met the soldiers coming back with the relieved expression of men who have feared the unknown danger and been suddenly set free from it. That was always Villa's power. He could explain things to the great mass of ordinary people in a way that they immediately understood. The Federals, as usual, had failed to take advantage of their opportunity to inflict a lasting defeat upon the Constitutionalists. Perhaps they feared an ambush like the one Villa had arranged at Mapula when the victorious Federals sallied out to pursue Villa's fleeing army after the first attack on Chihuahua and were repulsed with heavy slaughter. Anyway, they did not come out. The men came straggling back, hunting in the mesquite for their guns and blankets and for other people's guns and blankets. You could hear them shouting and joking all over the plain. Oiga, where are you going with that rifle? That's my water bag. I dropped my serape right there by this bush and now it's gone. Oh, Juan, cried one man to another, I always told you I could beat you running. But you didn't, compadre. I was 100 meters ahead, flying through the air like a cannonball. The truth was that after riding 12 hours the day before, fighting all night and all morning in the blazing sun under the frightful strain of charging an entrenched force in the face of artillery and machine guns, without food, water, or sleep, the army's nerve had suddenly given way. But from the time that they returned after the flight, their ultimate result was never in doubt. The psychological crisis was past. Now the rifle fire had altogether ceased, and even cannon shots from the enemy were few and far between. At the ditch under the first line of trees, our men entrenched themselves. The artillery had withdrawn to the second line of trees a mile back, and under the grateful shade of men threw themselves heavily down and slept. The strain had snapped. As the sun rose toward noon, the desert, hill and town, throbbed silently in the intense heat. Sometimes an exchange of shots far to the right or left told where the outposts were exchanging compliments. But even that soon stopped. In the cotton and cornfields to the north, among the sprouting green things, insects chirped. The birds sang no more because of the heat. It was breathless. The leaves stirred in no wind. Here and there little fires smoked, where the soldiers rolled tortillas from scanty flour they had brought in their saddlebags, and those who didn't have any swarmed around, begging a crumb. Everybody simply and generously divided the food. I was held from a dozen fires with, Hey, compañero, have you breakfasted? Here is a piece of my tortilla. Come and eat. Rows of men lay flat on their stomachs along the irrigation ditch, scooping up the dirty water in their palms. 3 or 4 miles back, we could see the cannon car and the first 2 trains opposite the big ranch of El Vejel, with the tireless repair gang hard at it in the hot sun. The provision train had not come up yet. Little Colonel Servin came by, perched on an immense bay horse, still dapper and fresh from the terrible work of the night. I don't know what we shall do yet, he said. Only the general knows that, and he never tells. But we shall not assault again until the Brigada Zaragoza returns. Benavides has had a hard battle over there at Sacramento. 250 of 250 of ours killed, they say. And the general has sent for General Robles and General Contreras, who have been attacking from the south, to bring up all their men and join him here. They say, though, that we are going to deliver a night attack next, so that their artillery won't be effective. He galloped on. About midday, thin columns of sluggish, dirty smoke began to rise from several points in the town, and toward afternoon, a slow, hot wind brought to us the faintly sickening smell of crude oil mingled with scorched human flesh. The Federals were burning piles of the dead. We walked back to the trains and stormed General Benavides' private car in the Brigada Zaragoza train. The major in charge had them cook us something to eat in the general's kitchen. We ate ravenously and afterward went over along the line of trees and slept for hours. Late in the afternoon we started once more for the front. Hundreds of soldiers and peons of the neighborhood, ravenously hungry, prowled around the trains hoping to pick up discarded food or slops or anything at all to eat. They were ashamed of themselves, however, and affected a sauntering indolence when we passed. I remember that we saw for a while taking with some soldiers on the top of a boxcar when a boy, crisscrossed with cartridge belts and lugging a huge rifle, came past beneath, his eyes searching the ground. A stale tortilla, half rotting, crunched into the dirt by many passing feet, caught his attention. He pounced upon it and bit a piece out. Then he looked up and saw us. "As if I were dying of hunger," he said scornfully, and tossed it away with contempt. Down in the shade of the Alamos, across the ditch from San Ramon, the Canadian Captain Treston was bivouacked with his machine gun battery. The guns and their heavy tripods were unloaded from the mules, and all around lay the unlimbered field pieces, their animals grazing in the rich green fields. The men squatted around their fires or lying stretched out in the bank of the ditch. Treston waved an ashy tortilla he was munching and bawled, "Say, Reed, please come here and interpret for me. I can't find my interpreters, and if we go into action, I'll be in a hell of a fix. You see, I don't know the damn language, and when I came down here, I hired 2 interpreters to go around with me all the time. I can't ever find the sons of guns. They always go off and leave me in a hole." I took part of the proffered delicacy and asked him if he thought there was any chance of going into action. "I think we'll go in tonight as soon as it's dark," he answered. Do you want to go along with the machine guns and interpret?" I said I did. A ragged man near the fire, whom I had never seen before, rose and came across smiling. "I thought when I looked at you that you seemed to be an hombre who hadn't tasted tobacco for a while. Will you take half my cigarette?" Before I could protest, he produced a lopsided brown cigarette and tore it across in 2 pieces. The sun went gloriously down behind the notched purple mountains in front of us, and for a minute a clear fan of quivering light poured up the high arc of stainless sky. The birds awoke in the trees, leaves rustled. The fertile land exhaled a pearly mist. A dozen ragged soldiers, lying close together, began to improvise the air and words of a song about the Battle of Torreon. A new ballad was being born. Other singing came to us through the still, cool dusk. I felt my whole feeling going out to these gentle, simple people. So lovable they were. It was just after I'd been to the ditch for a drink that Tristan said casually, "By the way, one of our men found this floating in the ditch a little while ago. I can't read Spanish, so I didn't know what the word meant. You see, the water from these ditches all come from the river inside the town, so I thought it might be a federal paper." I took it from his hand. It looked like it was folded. It was a little folded white piece of wet paper, like the corner and front of a package. In large black letters was printed on the front, "Arsenico," in smaller type. "Cuidado! Bueno, arsenic! Beware! Poison!" Look here, I demanded, sitting up suddenly. "Have there been any sick people around here this evening?" "That's funny you're asking," he said. "A good many of the men have had bad cramps in the stomach, and I don't feel altogether well. Just before you came, a mule suddenly keeled over and died in that next field, and a horse across the ditch. Fatigue or sunstroke, probably. Fortunately, the ditch carried a large body of swiftly running water, so the danger was not great." I explained to him that the Federals had poisoned the ditch. "My God," said Tristan, "perhaps that is what they were trying to tell me. About 20 people have come up to me and said something about envenenado. What does that mean?" "That's what it means," I answered. Where can we go? Where can we get about a quart of strong coffee?" I found a great can of it at the nearest fire and felt better. "Oh yes, we knew," said the men. "That is why we watered the animals at another ditch. We heard long ago. They say that 10 horses are dead down in front, and that many men are rolling very sick on the ground. An officer on horseback rode by, shouting that we were all to go back to El Vergel and camp there beside the trains for the night. That the general had said that everyone but the advance guards were to get a good night's sleep out of the zone of fire, and that the commissary train had come up and was just behind the hospital train. Bugles sounded, and the men struggled up off the ground, catching mules, fastening their harnesses on amid shouting and braying and jingling, saddling horses and limbering guns. Tristan got on his pony and I walked along beside. So there was to be no night attack then. It was now almost dark. Across the ditch we fell in with shadowy forms of a company of soldiers trotting northward, all muffling blankets and big hats and ringing spurs. They held me. "Hey, compañero, where's your horse?" I admitted I had none. "Jump up behind me then," chimed in 5 or 6 altogether. One pulled up right beside me and I mounted with him. We jogged on through the mesquite and across a dim, lovely field. Someone began to sing and 2 more joined in. A round, full moon bubbled up in the clear night. Oiga, how do you say mula in English? Asked my horseman. Goddamn stubborn fat-head mule, I told him. And for days, after entire strangers would stop me and ask me with roars of laughter how the Americans said mula. Around the ranch of El Vergel, the army was encamped. We rode into a field dotted with fires, where aimless soldiers wandered around in the dark, shouting to know where the Brigada Gonzalez Ortega was, or Jose Rodriguez's gente, or the ametralladoras. Toward the artillery was unlimbering in a wide, alert half-circle, guns pointing south. To the east, the camp of Benavides Brigada Zaragoza, just arrived from Sacramento, made an immense glow in the sky. From the direction of the provision train, a long ant-like file of men bore sacks of flour, coffee, and packages of cigarettes. 100 different singing choruses swelled up into the night. It comes to my mind with particular vividness how I saw a poor poisoned horse suddenly double up and fall, thrashing. How we passed a man bent to the ground in the darkness, vomiting violently. How after I had rode up on the ground in my blankets, terrible cramps suddenly wrenched me, and I crawled out a way into the brush and didn't have the strength to crawl back. In fact, until gray dawn, I rode very sick on the ground. Chapter 11, An Outpost in Action. Tuesday, early in the morning, the army was in motion again toward the front, straggling down the track and across the field. 400 raging demons sweated and hammered at the ruined track. The foremost train had made half a mile in the night. Horses were plenty that morning, and I bought one, saddle and all, for 75 pesos, about $15 in gold. Trotting down by San Ramon, I fell in with two wild-looking horsemen in high sombreros with little printed pictures of Our Lady of Guadalupe sewed on the crowns. They said they were going out to the outpost upon the extreme right wing, nearing the mountains above Lerdo, where their company was posted to hold a hill. Why should I want to come with Francisco Villa? Why should I want to come with them? Who was I anyway? I showed them my pass, signed by Francisco Villa. They were still hostile. Francisco Villa is nothing to us, they said. And how do we know whether this is his name written by him? We are the Brigada Juarez, Calixto Contreras gente. But after a short consultation, the taller grunted, "Come." We left the protection of the trees, striking out diagonally across the ramparted cotton fields, due west, straight for a steep high hill that already quivered in the heat. Between us and the suburbs of Gomez Palacio stretched a barren, flat plain covered with low mesquite and cut by dry irrigation ditches. The Cerro de la Pila, with its murderous concealed artillery, lay perfectly quiet, except that up one side of it, so clear was the air, we could make out a little knot of figures dragging what looked like a cannon. Just outside of the nearest houses, some horsemen were riding around. We immediately struck north, making a wide detour, carefully on the watch, for this intermediate ground was overrun by pickets and scouting parties. About a mile beyond, almost along the foot of the hill, ran the high road from the north to Lerdo. We reconnoitered this carefully from the brush. A peasant passed whistling, driving a flock of goats. On the very edge of this road, under a brush, there was an earthen jar full of milk. Without the least hesitation, the first soldier drew his revolver and shot. The jar split into 100 pieces, milk spurting everywhere. "Poisoned," he said briefly. "The first company stationed over here drank some of that stuff. 4 died. We rode on. Up the hill crest a few black figures squatted, their rifles tilted over their knees. My companions waved to them, and we turned north along the bank of the little river that unrolled a narrow strip of green grass in the midst of desolation. The outpost was camped on both sides of the water in a sort of meadow. I asked where the colonel was and finally found him stretched out in the shade of a tent that he had made by hanging his serape over a brush. "Get down from your horse, friend," he said. "I am glad to welcome you here. My house," pointing quizzically to the roof of his tent, "is at your disposal. Here are cigarettes. There is meat cooking on the fire. Upon the meadow, fully saddled, grazed the horses of the troop, about 50 of them. The men sprawled on the grass in the shade of the mesquite, chatting and playing cards. This was a different breed of men from the well-armed, well-mounted, comparatively disciplined troops of Villa's army. They were simply peons who had risen in arms, like my friends of La Tropa, a tough, happy race of mountaineers and cowboys, among whom were many who had been bandits in the old days. Unpaid, ill-clad, and undisciplined, their officers merely the bravest among them, armed only by aged Springfields and a handful of cartridges apiece. They had fought almost continuously for 3 years. For 4 months, they and the irregular troops of such guerrilla chiefs as Urbina and Robles had held the advance around Torreon, fighting almost daily with federal outposts and suffering all the hardships of the campaign, while the main army garrisoned Chihuahua and Juarez. These ragged men were the bravest soldiers in Villa's army. I had lain there about 15 minutes watching the beef sizzle in the flames and satisfying the eager curiosity of a crowd as to my curious profession. And when there was a sound of galloping and a voice, "They're coming out of Lerdo! To horse!" 100 men reluctantly and in a leisurely manner made for their horses. The colonel rose yawning. He stretched. "Fuck the animals of Federals," he growled. "They stay on our minds all the time. You never have time to think of more pleasant things. It's a shame they won't let us even eat our dinner." We were mounted soon, trotting down the bank of the stream. Far in front sounded the pin-pricking rifles. Instinctively, without order, we broke into a gallop through the streets of a little village where the Pacificos stood on the roofs of their houses, looking off to the south, little bundles of their belongings beside them so they could flee if the battle went against us. For the Federals cruelly punish villages which have harbored the enemy. Beyond lay the stony little hill We got off our horses and, throwing the reins over their heads, climbed on foot. About a dozen men already lay there, shooting spasmodically in the direction of the green bank of trees behind which Lerdo lay. Unseen, scattering shots ripped through the blank desert between. About half a mile away, small brown figures dodged around in the brush. A thin dust cloud showed where another detachment was marching slowly north in their rear. "We've already got one sure, and another one in the leg," said a soldier, spitting. "How many do you make them out?" asked the colonel. "About 200. The colonel stood bolt upright, carelessly looking out over the sunny plain. Immediately a roll of shots swept along their front. A bullet chirped overhead. Already the men had gone to work, unordered. Each soldier picked out a smooth place to lie and piled up a little heap of stones in front to shield him. They lay down, grunting, loosening their belts and taking off their coats to be perfectly comfortable. Then they began slowly and methodically to shoot. "There goes another," announced the colonel. "Yours, Pedro." "Not Pedro's at all," interrupted another man fretfully. "I got him." "Oh, the devil you did," snapped Pedro. They quarreled. The firing from the desert was now pretty general, and we could see the Federals slipping toward us under the protection of every bush and arroyo. Our men fired slowly and carefully, aiming a long time before they pulled the trigger, for the months with scanty ammunition around Torreon had made them economical. But now every hill and bush along our line held a little knot of sharpshooters, and looking back on the wide flats and fields between the hill and the railroad, I saw innumerable single horsemen and squads of them spurring through the brush. In 10 minutes we would have 500 men with us. The rifle fire along the line swelled and deepened until there was a solid mile of it. The Federals had stopped. Now the dust clouds began slowly to move backward in the direction of Lerdo. The fire from the desert slackened, and then from nowhere we suddenly saw the broad-winged vultures sailing serene and motionless in the blue. The colonel, his men, and I democratically ate lunch in the shade of the village houses. Our meat, of course, scorched, so we had to do the best we could with jerked beef and pinole, which seemed to be cinnamon and bran ground fine. I never enjoyed a meal so, and when I left, the men made up a double handful of cigarettes as a present. Said the colonel, "Amigo, I am sorry that we had not time for a talk together. There are many things I want to ask you about your country. Whether it is true, for example, that in your cities men have entirely lost the use of their legs and don't ride horseback in the streets, but are borne about in automobiles. I had a brother once who worked on the railroad track near Kansas City, and he told me wonderful things. But a man called him Greaser one day and shot him without that my brother did anything to him. Why is it your people don't like Mexicans? I like many Americans. I like you. Here is a gift for you." He unbuckled one of his huge iron spurs, inlaid with silver, and gave it to me. But we never had any time here for talk. These always annoy us, and then we can have to get up and kill a few of them before we can have a moment's peace. Under the Alamo trees, I found one of the photographers and a moving picture man. They were lying flat on their backs near a fire, around which squatted 20 soldiers gorging ravenously flour tortillas, meat, and coffee. One proudly displayed a silver wristwatch. "That used to be my watch," explained the photographer. "You see, we hadn't had anything to eat for 2 days. And when we came past here, these boys caught us and gave us the most magnificent feed I have ever tasted. After that, I just couldn't help giving them a present." The soldiers had accepted the gift communally and were agreeing that each should wear it for 2 hours from then on until the end of life. Chapter 12. Contreras' men assault. Wednesday, my friend, the photographer, and I were wandering across a field when Villa came by on his horse. He looked tired, dirty, but happy. Reining up in front of us, the motions of his body as easy and graceful as a wolf's, he grinned and said, "Well, boys, how's it going now?" We answered that we were perfectly contented. "I haven't time to worry about you, so you must be careful not to go into danger. It is bad. The wounded. Hundreds. They are brave, those muchachos. The bravest people in the world. But," he continued delightedly, "you must go and see the hospital train. There is something fine for you to write your papers about." And truly, it was a magnificent thing to see. The hospital train lay right behind the work train now, 40 boxcars enameled inside, stenciled on the side with a big blue cross and the legend, "Servicio Sanitario," handled the wounded as they came from the front. They were fitted inside with the latest surgical appliances and manned by 60 competent American and Mexican doctors. Every night, shuttle trains carried the seriously hurt back to the base hospitals at Chihuahua and Parral. We went down through San Ramon and beyond the end of the line of trees out across the desert. It was already stinging hot. In front, a snake of rifle fire unfolded along the line, and then a machine gun. Spat, spat, spat. As we emerged into the open, a lone Mauser began cracking down to the right somewhere. We paid no attention to it at first, but pretty soon we noticed that there was a little plumping sound in the ground around us. Puffs of dust flew up every few minutes. "By God," said the photographer, "some beggar's sniping at us." Instinctively, we both sprinted. The rifle shots came faster. It was a long distance across the plain. After a little, we reduced to a jog trot. Finally, we walked along with the dust spurting up as before and a feeling that, after all, it wouldn't do any good to run. Then we forgot it. Half an hour later, we crept through the brush a quarter of a mile from the outskirts of Gomez and came up upon a tiny ranch of 6 or 8 adobe huts with a street running between. In the lee of one of the houses lounged the sprawled about 60 of Contreras' ragged fighters. They were playing cards and talking lazily. Down the street, just around the corner, which pointed straight as a die toward the federal positions, a storm of bullets swept continually, whipping up the dust. These men had been on duty at the front all night. The countersign had been "No hats," and they were bareheaded in the broiling sun. They had had no sleep and no food. and there wasn't any water for half a mile. There is a federal quartel up ahead there that is firing, explained a boy about 12 years old. We've got orders to attack when the artillery comes. An old man squatting against the wall asked me where I came from. I said New York. Well, he said, I don't know anything about New York, but I'll bet you don't see such fine cattle going through the streets as you see in the streets of Jimenez. You don't see any cattle in the streets of New York, I said. He looked at me incredulously. What? No cattle? You mean to tell me that they don't drive cattle through the streets up there? Or sheep? I said they didn't. He looked at me as if he thought I was a great liar. Then he cast his eye on the ground and thought deeply. Well, he pronounced finally, then I don't want to go there. Two skylarking boys started a game of tag. In a minute, 20 full-grown men were chasing each other around in great glee. The card players had one short deck of torn cards, and at least 8 people were trying to play some game and arguing about the rules at the top of their voices, or perhaps there weren't enough cards to go around. 4 or 5 had crawled into the shade of the house, singing satirical love songs. All this time, the steady infernal din up ahead never relented. The bullets spattered in the dust like raindrops. Occasionally, one of the men would slouch over, poke his rifle around the corner, and fire. We stayed there about an hour. The 2 gray cannons came rocketing out of the brush behind the wheel and wheeled into position in a dry ditch 75 yards away on the left. I guess we're going in a minute, said the boy. And at that moment, 3 men galloped up from the rear, evidently officers. They were entirely exposed to rifle fire over the roofs of the huts, but jerked up their horses with the shots, yelling all around, contemptuous of them. The first to speak was Fierro, the superb great animal of a man who had murdered Benton. He sneered down at the ragged soldiers from his saddle. Well, this is a fine-looking crowd to take a city with, he said. But we've got nobody else here. Go in when you hear the bugle. Pulling cruelly on the bit so that the big horse reared straight up and whirled on his hind legs, Fierro galloped off rearward, saying as he went, Useless, those simple fools of Contreras. Death to the butchers, said a man furiously. That murderer killed my compadre in the streets of Durango for no crime or insult. My compadre was very drunk, walking in front of the theater. He asked Fierro what time it was, and Fierro said, You ass, how dare you speak to me before I speak to you first? But the bugle was blowing, and up they got, grabbing the guns. The tag game tried to stop, but couldn't. Furious card players were accusing each other of stealing the deck. Oiga, Fidencio, cried one soldier. I'll bet you my saddle I come back and you don't. This morning I won a nice bridle from one. All right, muy bien, my new pinto horse. Laughing, joking, rollicking, they swept out of the shelter of the houses into the rain of steel. They scuttled awkwardly up the street like little brown animals unused to running. Billowing dust veiled them, and a hell of a noise. So yeah, that will end that chapter and end that particular episode. But yeah, we're getting pretty far now. I'd say we're 3/4 of the way through the book. Part 5. I'm just going through the pages. Part 6. So there's some short parts coming up. But yeah, more of the effect of trying to time your attacks, finding the right moments. Right now, it's a lot of sit and wait while there's a lot of probing going on as far as the attacks. But yeah. 301, and we're on page 239. Okay. So we got 62 pages, more or less. But yeah. We're almost through there. It's definitely interesting as Reed describes the hospital train, the provision train. You know, you have to remember, this is the early 1900s. So if you can use the railroads to your advantage to provide what you need, then it gives you a better chance and a better feeling of taking a battle. Because you have, like I said, a hospital train taking care of every one of the injured. You have the provision train, so if you're low on food or low on ammunitions and stuff like that, it can help you. But the Constitutionalist forces have grown now because they've added other forces that have arrived to join with Villa's men. But yeah. A moment or two I had to stop there because they just had ... because they wasn't filling the words. So I was trying to just like imagine what it's trying to replace there, because sometimes it can be different. But yeah, because remember, these are all reports for a newspaper that Reed worked for. So he there was a lot of sensibilities of it. I don't want vulgarities. No. But as you know, guys, I don't care. I don't like to hide what words are supposed to be used. Some people won't like it. I don't care. History should never be censored. There's a lot of things in life that should never be censored or banned. But there's a great number of people who want to do that. Unfortunately, life itself is never that way. And so I believe you have to show the ugly with the good. You know, you can't just have only the wonderful information, despite the fact that so much other ugliness happened. Yeah. But yeah, it's pretty good. I like them talking about they just almost quit trying to worry about getting sniped at when there were snipers trying to shoot at them, because they'd hear the poof, poof, poof as the bullets hit the ground when somebody was trying to shoot them. And I believe the funniest part for me, again, this is your 19 let's see, the revolution was in what, 1910 for Mexico? I believe that's when it started. So yeah, you're looking at your 19 teens. And the guy's like, but I heard they no longer run cattle through the streets of New York. They don't even walk. They're all born about on something called an automobile. And remember, this is early days of the automobile, so yeah. I can see it being one of those what moments, because I mean the automobile in and of itself is not that old at that point in history. So yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this episode there. It's already been a long one. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.